A twist of fate. Lisa had always prided herself on her ability to maintain balance in her life. A successful architect, she had a flourishing career, a beautiful home, and what she thought was a stable marriage. James, her husband, was a charming man with a magnetic personality that had drawn Lisa in from the moment they met in college. They were the couple everyone envied, the ones who seemed to have it all. But beneath the surface, Lisa had started to notice cracks. Over the past year, James had grown increasingly distant. He was working late more often, spending weekends away on so-called business trips. And when he was home, he was moody and withdrawn. The man who once showered her with love and affection now seemed like a stranger. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but every time she tried to talk to James about it, he brushed her off with vague reassurances. The tension between them had been building for months, a silent storm brewing on the horizon, but nothing could have prepared Lisa for the events that would unfold one fateful night, shattering the illusion of the life she thought she knew. Chapter 1. Midnight Betrayal. It was a Friday night, and the summer air was thick with humidity. Lisa had just finished working on a challenging project, and she was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. James had called earlier, saying he would be home late, but he hadn't mentioned why. When he finally walked through the door around 11:30 p.m., Lisa noticed immediately that something was off. James looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and there was a nervous energy about him that Lisa hadn't seen before. He barely acknowledged her as he tossed his jacket onto the couch and poured himself a drink. "James, is everything okay?" Lisa asked, trying to keep her voice steady, despite the unease creeping up her spine. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he downed his drink in one gulp and turned to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I need $150,000, he said flatly, as if asking for a cup of coffee. Lisa blinked, certain she had misheard him. "What?" "I need $150,000, James repeated, his tone more insistent this time. "It's urgent." Lisa stared at him in disbelief. "James, I don't have that kind of money just lying around. Even if I did, why do you need it? What's going on?" James's expression darkened, and he began pacing the room. "I don't have time to explain, Lisa. I just need the money, now." "Explain? James, you're scaring me. What's happening? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Lisa's voice was trembling now, her heart pounding in her chest. James stopped pacing and looked at her with a mix of desperation and anger. "I'm not asking, Lisa. I'm telling you. If you care about this marriage, you'll give me the money." Lisa felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The man standing before her was no longer the James she had married. This was someone else, someone she didn't recognize. "I can't give you what I don't have, and even if I could, I wouldn't just hand over that kind of money without knowing why. What are you involved in?" James's eyes flashed with rage. "You don't need to know. Just do what I'm asking." "No," Lisa said, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her. "I won't." Without warning, James grabbed her by the arm, his grip painfully tight. "Then get out," he shouted, shoving her towards the door. Lisa stumbled, nearly losing her balance. "James, please, let's talk about this," she pleaded, but he was already pulling her towards the front door. "I said get out!" James roared, pushing her out the door and slamming it behind her. Lisa stood on the front porch, her mind reeling. The cool night air did nothing to calm the storm of emotions raging inside her. How had things spiraled so far out of control? How had the man she loved turned into someone she barely recognized? With no other options, Lisa walked to her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with her keys. She had never felt so lost, so utterly alone. She drove aimlessly for a while, the dark, empty streets reflecting the emptiness she felt inside. Eventually, she found herself at a small, run-down motel on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was all she could think to do. She checked in and collapsed onto the lumpy bed, the tears finally coming in heavy, uncontrollable sobs. Chapter 2. The morning after. Lisa awoke the next morning with puffy eyes and a heavy heart. The events of the previous night felt surreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. But the ache in her chest was real, as was the fact that she had been kicked out of her own home by the man she thought she knew better than anyone. She sat up slowly, her head throbbing. The motel room was dim and shabby, with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew. Lisa felt a pang of despair. How had her life come to this? Determined not to sink further into self-pity, Lisa decided she needed answers. She couldn't just sit in that motel room and wait for something to happen. She needed to know what was going on with James, why he had demanded that money, and what had driven him to such an extreme. Lisa left the motel and drove back to her house, hoping that maybe James had calmed down and they could talk things out. But when she arrived, her heart sank. The locks had been changed. She tried calling James, but his phone went straight to voicemail. It was clear he didn't want to be found. Feeling desperate, Lisa turned to the one person she knew she could trust, her best friend, Rachel. Rachel and Lisa had been friends since high school, and there was no one Lisa trusted more. She drove to Rachel's house, praying her friend would be home. When Lisa arrived, Rachel immediately noticed something was wrong. "Lisa, what happened? You look like you've been through hell," Rachel said, pulling her friend into a comforting hug. Lisa broke down, telling Rachel everything that had happened. How James had demanded an absurd amount of money, how he had thrown her out of the house, and how she had no idea what was going on or what to do next. Rachel listened intently, her face a mix of concern and anger. "This doesn't make any sense, Lisa. James has always been a bit of a mystery, but this is something else. We need to figure out what's going on." Lisa nodded, wiping her eyes. "But how? I don't even know where to start." "Let's start with the basics," Rachel said, her voice calm but firm. "We'll dig into his recent activities, see if there's anything that stands out. We'll figure this out together." Chapter 3. Uncovering the Truth. Rachel and Lisa spent the next few hours combing through everything they could find about James. They searched his social media profiles, bank statements, and any other records they could access. It was a painstaking process, but they were determined to uncover the truth. The first red flag they discovered was a series of large withdrawals from their joint bank account over the past 6 months. James had been siphoning off money in chunks, and Lisa had never noticed. But that wasn't the worst of it. Through some careful digging, Rachel discovered that James had been involved in illegal gambling rings. He had racked up a massive debt, one that had likely driven him to the desperate measures he had taken the night before. "Oh my God, Lisa," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she pieced together the information. "James is in deep with some dangerous people. That's why he needed the money. He's trying to pay off his debts before they come after him." Lisa felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "How could he do this? How could he keep this from me?" Rachel shook her head, her expression grim. "I don't know, but we need to act fast. If he's involved with criminals, things could get ugly real quick." The weight of the situation pressed down on Lisa like a boulder. Her life was unraveling before her eyes, and she didn't know how to stop it. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "We need to protect you," Rachel said, her tone resolute. "If James is in as deep as it seems, you need to make sure you're safe. We should contact the authorities and let them know what's going on. But first, let's see if we can secure your finances so he can't drag you down with him." Lisa nodded, her mind racing. It was all happening so fast, and she struggled to keep up with the flood of emotions and information. But one thing was clear. James was not the man she thought he was, and she couldn't allow herself to be pulled down by his choices. Rachel helped Lisa contact their bank and put a hold on all their joint accounts. They also began the process of legally separating their finances, ensuring that James couldn't access any more of their money without her consent. Next, they reached out to a lawyer who specialized in cases involving financial fraud and criminal activity. The lawyer advised them to gather as much evidence as possible and to file a police report to protect Lisa from any potential fallout. Chapter 4: The Surprise. While Lisa and Rachel were taking steps to protect her, James was on the verge of panic. He had tried to access their joint account that morning, only to find that the funds had been frozen. His plan to flee town and escape his creditors was crumbling before his eyes. Desperate, James began calling in favors from anyone he could think of, but no one was willing to help. His creditors were closing in, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they found him. He needed that money, and he needed it fast. In his desperation, James decided to confront Lisa one last time. He was convinced that if he could just talk to her, he could manipulate her into giving him what he needed. But when he arrived at the house, he found the police waiting for him. Lisa had filed a report earlier that day, detailing James's illegal activities and his threats against her. The authorities had acted quickly, and James was arrested on the spot. As he was led away in handcuffs, James finally realized the full extent of the mess he had created. His carefully constructed world had come crashing down, and there was no one left to blame but himself. Chapter 5: New Beginnings. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Lisa's life. She had to navigate the legal proceedings against James, deal with the fallout from his actions, and come to terms with the fact that the man she had loved was not who she thought he was. But through it all, Lisa found strength she didn't know she had. With Rachel's unwavering support, she began to rebuild her life piece by piece. She threw herself into her work, finding solace in the structure and creativity of her projects. She started seeing a therapist who helped her process the trauma of what she had been through and encouraged her to focus on her own well-being. As the months passed, Lisa slowly started to feel like herself again. She moved into a new apartment, filled it with things that made her happy, and began reconnecting with friends she had lost touch with during the turmoil of her marriage. She even started dating again. Though she was cautious and took things slow, James was sentenced to several years in prison for his involvement in illegal gambling and financial fraud. Lisa chose not to attend the trial, preferring to focus on her future rather than reliving the pain of the past. One afternoon, as she sat in a cozy cafe, sipping tea and working on her latest design project, Lisa realized how far she had come. She had lost a lot, but she had gained something invaluable, a sense of self-worth and independence that she hadn't truly known before. As she looked out the window, watching the world go by, Lisa felt a sense of peace. She was no longer haunted by the shadows of her past. She was free, and she was ready to embrace whatever the future held. The storm had passed, and in its wake, Lisa had found the strength to start anew.